Right then. So, we are here. It's been a while. It's been over a year since we last did this show format, but we are back. We are in Comics on Trial, the show that pits two members of the Comics in Motion family in a geek battle. Each week, well, we were quite optimistic there. Each week, one person will defend an unpopular opinion, and the other, representing the common consensus, will prosecute the case in the court of public opinion. Today, we are putting Indiana Jones' Kingdom of the Crystal Skull in the dock, and representing the I've done this. I'm so not used to doing this, like reading directly from a script. Like I'm used to, I've just got notes of like keywords, and I should have abbreviated it for myself, but that's how long it's been with the show. And that's why I'm a new judge.
We're leaving it in.
I'm a new judge. Yeah, I'm a new judge, friends. I haven't done this. People have heard me on the show on both the defense. Well, I defended. a defense and attack. So I defended Phantom Menace against Scott and won, but then I prosecuted against Rise of Skywalker against Tony and lost. That my now fiance chose against me. Outrage. People thought she was going to be biased towards me, and it didn't.
I did Phantom Menace and Scott did Rise of Skywalker.
Oh, yeah. Right, sorry. That was it. No, and I did... I did something. Was it Rise of Skywalker? Was that the only Comics on Trial I've been on?
I think so.
We did Phantom Menace, you and I. Yeah. And then you and he did Skywalker. Right?
Yep.
You did both.
I thought I did both, yeah, but you and I did Rise of Skywalker, Tony, because you defended it. You defended Rise of Skywalker.
Why did I think I did? I thought I did Phantom.
And then I did Phantom Menace with Scott, because Scott was prosecuting against me, and I won on that one. So now I'm the judge. And it's funny that the two people I've been against in the Comics on Trial, I'm now... So I'm as impartial as we get. And
the common factor, George Lucas.
Well, yeah, exactly. So it's very apt, very apt, and even Harrison Ford as well. Yeah, even I wouldn't say that. But obviously the intros haven't gone exactly how they would in the script, but we're done away with that. It's all part of the fun. So I am here, being the judge, so I should be quiet for most of this, with Scott Weatherly of the 20th Century Geek, our Stories Out of Time and Space. How are you doing, good sir? And you are prosecuting Indiana Jones' Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, so tell us how you are, and tell us just in brief what your kind of opening statement is in a way.
Okay, yeah, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, as we were just saying, the hay fever has been kicking my butt a little bit, but I'm through it and I'm ready to take on this prosecution. As you say, 20th Century Geek, a little bit on hiatus, but Stories Out of Time and Space going strong, working our way through all the episodes of Black Mirror, me and Julian, which has been fascinating, good stories, some controversial opinions coming on that one. But yeah, Indiana Jones and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I watched this in cinemas in Las Vegas. I was in Vegas for a wedding, and I went and sort of watched this on my own. And I'm a massive Indiana Jones fan. There's a photo of me in a homemade fancy dress as a child going to a kids party, and I will say this: it wasn't a kids fancy dress party. I just chose to go as Indiana Jones. I was young enough or old enough to see Last Crusade in the cinema, so this was a big thing, and I went in. It wasn't very busy. There was me and there was this other guy sitting close, and he was at my age. And we were both like, oh, it's exciting stuff. And when it was done, he looked at me and he just rolled his eyes, sighed, and walked out. And I don't think I was feeling that bad, but there was that level of disappointment. I'd waited 20 years to return to this story, and then to have this story and this film be presented to me. And I feel that it's that disappointment. I mean, I'm going to vent, and I'm going to bring some of the receipts on that. Really, that's where I'm coming from today.
I see. And so, is your point? Are you trying to make what's your kind of key argument in a sense? Is it that Indiana Jones' Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is obviously I'll ask for Tony.
It's the worst of the four. We've got Dial of Destiny coming, but I believe it's the worst of the Indiana Jones films.
Okay.
But I also want to prosecute on the fact that it doesn't hold true to the spirit of the Indiana Jones movies.
Okay, interesting point. So, Tony, you then, how are you, good sir? And then tell us, Indiana Jones, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, your thoughts and opening statement.
Sure. So, hello, thank you for doing this. I appreciate you guys jumping on. So for not my earliest memory doesn't involve Harrison Ford and my cousin Noom, seeing the original Star Wars in the movie theater at the drive-in when I was 4. But this Raiders of the Lost Ark is the movie I saw the most in theaters. Every Tuesday for an entire summer, my auntie took us to the movies to see Raiders of the Lost Ark because it was $1. Oh, wow. And so my sister and my cousin saw something different each Tuesday, and Noom and I saw this. sell Raiders. And so I, too, won a Halloween costume, Mr. Weatherly, wearing this hat right here.
Which is phenomenal. I love it.
It's such a cool hat.
And so this is my grandpa's hat, and I tried to put it on over the thing. It's about 100 and some years old. It was handmade in Benton Harbor, Michigan. I wore this hat. I had like a little wooden machete because it was during that I dressed up for him, obviously during Temple, and then as an adult, I also dressed as Indiana Jones when I had kids. So this is same hat, different jacket, obviously because
you grew up.
but I had a whip and everything as a kid. I would like whip and swing and do everything. So so my argument is, number one, that it is not the worst of the 4 films, and that number 2, it is exactly what it's supposed to be 20 years later, because Indiana Jones is 20 years older. The world is it's the 50s. It's the late 50s instead of the late 30s. So we've gone through World War II. And so he would change, the world would change, obviously obviously clearly having Sean Connery in the 3rd film, there's a big part of that. So I'm sure that'll come up. But so of course it felt a little different, but I do understand where it was going. So I'm just here to say, I love it. I think it's fun. And I disagree that I think it has gotten a bum rap. And so I'm here to try to prove that.
Can I start at one point? I'm not going to rebuke. I am actually just curious.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
What do you feel is then the weakest of the indie movies?
Temple.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's I believe the second. I think
if you were about to say Last Crusade, I think I would come.
I'd have reached through the cameras and started killing people. Yeah.
I think if people say Raiders is their favorite, that's acceptable to me. But for me, Last Crusade is absolutely.
Last Crusade is perfection.
But
that is the perfect. Like, you don't even have to have seen anything else.
Yeah.
Last Crusade is the most Spielbergian.
Yes.
Movie. That's the one that he doesn't get writing credit for any of these 4 films, but that is the one where clearly he was like, look, if we're going to do a 3rd one, get out of my way. Yes. George, I love you, brother, but get out of the way. And that is exactly what happened in the 3rd one.
Yeah, I agree. So with these films, I've got a couple of just notes about it, and I think the years of release will be a factor in some of the discussions here. So just in brief, before we kind of delve into the minutiae of these films and we present certain elements. So we've got Raiders of the Lost Ark was out in 1981, then 3 years later.
I was born.
Nice, very nice. 81, and then 3 years on from that was Temple of Doom in 1984. Then 5 years on from that was The Last Crusade in 1989. Then 19 years after that is Kingdom of the Crystal Skull in 2008. And then with Dial of Destiny coming out, that's 15 years difference in 2023. So 3, 5, 19, 15 is the kind of the gaps between them. And obviously this is the end. We had a trilogy that finished with Last Crusade, which we've all just agreed is absolutely phenomenal, and in my opinion the best indie film. Incredible. And I myself, for a bit of research for this, I hadn't seen the Indiana Jones films for a while, years in fact. Before, me and Megan haven't watched them together, so we just decided on a whim. She was actually like, I really fancy watching Raiders of the Lost Ark, so we did. And then with this coming up, we're like, oh cool, we have a chance to watch the others. And when I was younger, I wasn't as into it. So with you two both being super into Indiana Jones, my dad was. He loved Harrison Ford, so Han Solo and Indy was his two go-tos. But like, I enjoyed Indy. I liked it, but it didn't quite connect with me because I've always been much more of a sci-fi head. You wouldn't know anything about that, Scott. You don't like sci-fi, so it's...
Yeah.
But yeah,
I'm all about the courtroom dramas. That's my thing.
Stories out of Dick Wolf's Law and Order is next. Because I'm sure Julian would love those. That would be like a surefire way to make him jump in that volcano on his island, is to have him have to do that.
Oh man, but yeah. So with Indy, I liked it, but I didn't love it. I didn't quite get into it, and I especially really disliked Temple of Doom when I was younger. And then I will not say anything about my I'll say I've come into this very neutral. I've watched them all 4 of them, and I've taken a few notes and things. And I think the first and third one heads and shoulders above the rest, but the second and fourth one, I'm kind of like this with them, depending on situations. And I know that both of you are going to come up with very interesting points that I've certainly not considered. And so it's going to be very interesting because I am genuinely completely unbiased in this. I don't have a closeness to Indy. So when Kingdom came out, I was like, cool, another Indiana Jones film, sure. But when I did watch the cinema, I wasn't as much of a fan. I did have a bit of a bad taste in my mouth, but yeah, I'm kind of neutralish now. So I'm really interested to see where we go from here. And I haven't really spoken about Indiana Jones, which is quite atrocious because it's Lucasfilm, as you guys have pointed out and things. So it's very exciting to get into this. So we will start with Tony on this one, just to start with. So Tony, where do you want to begin? Shall we compare the first three to the fourth, or do you have a specific point in mind you want to kind of jump off with?
Well, I think it's impossible not to, but I'm not here. I am here to definitely say Crystal Skull is better than Temple, and that can be part of my argument. But my reason to defend Crystal Skull is I think it was unfairly maligned. I think it is one of those things that it couldn't help it. People kind of felt like it was a cover band of its own thing. I do think I personally believe there was some Shia LaBeouf backlash because this was kind of at the height of his douchiness when this came out. Like, he filmed it and he was like in Transformers, he was everywhere, and then people found out he was like a method actor and he scared that woman who was Alice Wachowski, I can't think of her first name, on the set of their Bootlegger movie because he wouldn't get out of character, and it was like, he's kind of a creep and weirdo. And so I think that hurt. But I think there was this idea that it was going to be perfect. And I put the blame a little bit at George Lucas superfan Ernest Cline's feet as well, because in Ready Player One, the book, which had come out before this, he had already poisoned the well by telling everyone that anything after the original trilogy was going to suck. And it was only a rumor at the time that there would be more. So I should
say I only read Ready Player One when the film came out. So I'm not saying I wasn't poisoned before.
Totally fair. Okay, that's totally fair. But I do think that was so that's good to know. But I do think that there was just this idea that because the third one was perfect, everyone's like, well, why ruin it? But to me, that means that after you did, From Russia with Love, you should stop doing James Bond movies because it's the best Sean Connery movie. So we should just stop. That's silly to say. Like, when Sean Connery got too old, we kept making James Bond films. And Indiana Jones is Steven Spielberg's James Bond movie. He wanted to do Bond and they wouldn't let him, so he did this. So to me, it's just like anything else. I think it was doomed to fail because of that. And my concern in this, we're releasing this on Dial of Destiny Day, is that people are going to go into Dial again. Now it's been 15 years. Yeah. You acknowledge the point. So I just think I don't think it had the chance, because in everybody's mind, the last one was so good that they immediately compared it. But I'm here to say it is on par with the other three films. We will just agree that Last Crusade is perfect, but is on par with those. And I think it does the things that Indiana Jones needs to do in 1957.
So your point is generally you want this film not to be looked at like, this is the Indiana Jones trilogy that's great, and then there's that one. You want it to be, here's the 4 great Indiana Jones films. That's
correct. It is part of.
You want it to
series.
be a quadrilogy, not a trilogy in another one.
That's exactly correct. I'm not a believer that anything after, because same with like it was like, oh, there's only one Matrix movie and those other ones aren't. No, sorry, that's the films they wanted to make. You can dislike them, but to pretend they don't exist. And I know Scott's not here to say Crystal Skull doesn't exist. But that is an argument that people make. Yeah. And so I'm here to say it is a very good film that deserves its place.
I agree with that. I will go on that. I will say that, I know there's some bits I want to agree and I'll disagree as well, but you're right. I think, it's an Indiana Jones film. It exists in the franchise. Unfortunately, like A Good Day to Die Hard is a part of the Die Hard franchise. It's like, Terminator Genesis is part of the Terminator franchise. And Mike...
Are you just going to name Jai Courtney films? Is that what you're...
I appear to be, yeah. And Caravan of Courage is a part of the Star Wars. You can't deny these things. What I would say is, though, just to sort of back up, firstly, I have no problem with Shia LaBeouf in this film. And actually, I've recently gone back and watched some of the Transformers films. And having watched this, and there's a film called Disturbia.
Yes,
he did as well. I watched that. I find that young Shia LaBeouf is actually very good. I think he is a great actor. I think he's a great presence. I think he works as relatively well as Mutt Williams in this. So I'm not going to bash Shia LaBeouf. I actually think I understand what you're saying. I do feel that there was that in the zeitgeist at the time. For me, though, I'm going to counter this. So there's a couple of things that I find interesting about this film's placement in history. in its time. And again, not so much the chronology of in the Indiana Jones timeline, and I'm happy that they went into the 50s and didn't try and sort of lie about his age and have him in the 40s or something like that. Like having him in the 50s, I'm fine with that. Acknowledging his age and these legacy sequels, all good. The problem I have is actually more about the production of the film, and that's what I mean. Its place in history. What I see when I remember watching the trailer for this, and one of the, we'll get into it, and there's a couple of things, but there's an entire sequence in the jungle in this film that includes like big tanks and tree chopping things and monkey swinging and a bunch of other things. And all I could think of when I saw that, and it's noted in the trailer, was this is a post Pirates of the Caribbean film. That's what this is. And that's where they've taken Indy, and that's why Shire's here, because Indy can't do those swashbuckling Johnny Depp sort of Errol Flynn-esque kind of adventure things. He's too old, so we need a younger person to do those. And that's where I was seeing it as that sort of thing. Is when I was saying it doesn't feel of a piece, is there are scenes in this film. So if you do go back, and again, we've said about the three, and I agree with Temple being on par for similar reasons. You've got the young sidekick, you have the ridiculous moments, whether it be the mine chase or the jungle chase, those sorts of things. But in all those films, you have exterior shots where you'll go, bloody hell, that looks good. You have the most iconic shot from Raiders where you have the sun setting down behind them, and you have all the sort of the Egyptian workmen working and singing along, and you have this sort of Indy sort of silhouetted on that hill. But then you have the whole desert thing, and you have all the outdoor sets, and it's incredibly sort of tactile and real, and all the stunts look real, and you think, Jesus, like someone must have been bruised to fuck to make that thing. And the same with Temple, you have these exterior shots, they ride elephants, they have all these things. It feels like it exists in the real world. And then you have, again, the same with Last Crusade. They go to Venice, they have the boat chase, they have all these other things, they go to all over the place, right? And then the tank chase at the end, which is possibly one of my favorite sequences in history of cinema, is just amazing. And ends with that moment. I think you put it on there, didn't you, Tony? Of how the emotional scene of the sort of the tank goes over, then they see the hat, and it's
Jack did, but it is spot on. Yeah,
it's perfect. But this film, apart from one scene, it never feels that scale. They go places, but because of the CGI use, I'm not bashing the use of CGI because I think it's a thing, or even the quality, but it brings a different feel. And I felt this is a post Star Wars post Star Wars prequel, post Caribbean, Pirates of the Caribbean film. And there are several scenes like where they first come across, they're in Peru and they have the burial thing, and they have the Peruvian warrior ninja men, which is kind of cool. But that set feels like a set. And then they have another bit, and when they actually go into the jungle, I'm like, it feels like a set. Like there's never anything expansive. And for such a big film, it feels kind of small throughout. And so when I say of the same spirit of Indy, this one I want to clarify. When I say the spirit of Indiana Jones, I mean this doesn't have that tactile, massive, great vista, sort of practical effect kind of spectacle that I'm looking for when it comes to an Indiana Jones film.
Yeah, that sense of adventure almost. It feels enclosed in a way.
It does this, very much so. Yeah.
I hear that. I do, but I do think too. I mean that is true. But I mean, like Temple, most of Temple, 50% of it takes place underground.
Yeah, but that's fun. But it feels expansive though. Those sets. I mean, that set of the Kali set. With the sort of like the big skull and the I know there's a lot of map painting going on in that. You can see something, but it still feels big, and it doesn't feel like much like a set. But this feels like it's filmed inside, to me at least. Like, and especially that scene with the ninjas. They're not ninjas. You know what I mean?
No, I know. I do. I know because it was. Every time you see that scene, you're like, have you guys always been in there? Did you get like a call? You got to show up because people.
The buzzer goes. The pager goes. Oh, we're on.
Oh, we got to go hide in the thing, and we got to. It's got to be worth it because we're going to break out, and it's going to look cool as fuck. I hear what you're saying. I do think that's. But I do think that's. I mean, same goes with Spielberg. I mean, it's a Spielbergian thing. You know, I mean, when you think back, I mean, he didn't use a real shark, everybody, for Jaws, in case you were worried. I know, I'm sorry to be but he did, there is, you know, like, he did everything he could do, right? You know, to build the thing, to make it look real, and that poor woman, oh my God, like, she never got paid enough. I hope in residuals, that woman got all the money from the opening shot of. She
got compensation, I believe, later on. So
good.
Mike doesn't know what we're saying, by the way, do you?
Have you not seen Jaws, Mike?
Seen what?
Jaws.
Oh, no, I've seen Jaws. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Which opening part?
So the woman that goes into the sea that does the skinny dipping in the opening sequence.
Yeah.
They couldn't film this, like, they couldn't show the shark, so they strapped her into a harness and then basically hoofed her around the sea for several takes.
She get quite bruised and stuff, quite injured.
It gave her back problems. I think she fractured her hip.
Yeah,
or something.
I have heard about that. I thought you were talking about in Temple of Doom when the main actress gets covered in all those bugs, and those are real bugs. She had to be sedated to actually deal with that.
Yes,
that's his own wife. So in that case, Spielberg's wife did that scene.
Oh, is that?
He's married to Kate Capshaw.
Right.
Yeah, they got divorced later, though. Maybe because of that.
That's the start.
But
it became a Spielberg
I hear what
kink.
you're saying, but I do, yes. I do think, though, that is a progression of Spielberg, though, because when you watch, I mean, what he did, obviously the dinosaurs aren't real in Jurassic Park either, but it is what he does. He's always trying to push the next thing. So to him, I get what you're saying, making this seem like it's too, because you're right. It is this is still Lucasfilms. It's, Lucasfilms make the special effects here, but it's still Spielberg's final say. So while I hear that, I also just feel like it's just a progression of what he's done in his career when he still does these big films. Even in his version of West Side Story, there's some CGI and you can see stuff that could have been all done practically. There's no reason that had to be. So I just think it's him as a filmmaker saying, well, what can I do now that I've got the original budget? They doubled the budget for this movie from the previous movie. And part of that is inflation, of course, $1989 and $2008, but it's like a double budget. So he's like, what can I get away with? And generally you think if I've got a bigger budget, that means I can do more practical effects, a la what Tom Cruise does. But Spielberg is saying I'm not. While Harrison loves to do his own stunts, and I know it's always him on the horse. But you're also like, listen, man, we're not doing this, and these monkeys aren't real. So, I hear that, but I just think it's part of Spielberg's progression as a director. Yeah, we'll see what it does without.
But progression just because it's progression doesn't mean it's good, and that's the problem. I understand that, and I do, and I appreciate what you're saying about the advances of technology. I mean, this came out the same year as Iron Man. The advances and Dark Knight, and so the uses of CGI and stuff, and technology in these films is warranted. I've just watched Avatar: The Way of Water not too long ago, so it's paved the way. It's been part of that. It's still that closed-inness, though, that it feels, matte paintings, the ending sequence where they sort of get up onto the ruins and the ground starts spinning around. I'm like, it looks like indie and that are looking at a screen. It's okay, I've seen matte paintings, and maybe it's because I've got that thing about the Uncanny Valley. I'll still watch a Ray Harryhausen thing and go, that's amazing, And then I'll watch a CGI that will look just as sort of shonky and go, well, that's awful. But maybe I'm snobbish in that way, but that's my feel.
I hear that. And again, I guess to me, maybe that's just a preference thing. I mean, I don't feel like it took me out of it because again, time and place. I mean, Mike gave us the dates and you're right. It is just, it's just kind of I didn't think Spielberg's third dinosaur movie was any good, but he was definitely trying something different. You know what I mean? And I don't think Spielberg, you can never blame Spielberg. You can never say Spielberg, you're doing the same shit over and over. I mean, you're always going to talk about fathers and sons. That's a thing you're always going to do. There's no doubt about it.
I want to get onto that as well.
Yeah.
I'd say with the location point, I think as we get further on in this, I will not be so clear with points allocation because I don't want it to be very clear exactly who I'm choosing and stuff like that. But I will say just on this specific part, I will concede with Scott because I think that thinking about it, especially as Post-Pirates of the Caribbean is such a great way of putting it, the scenes where they are swinging in that jungle, it doesn't look like a jungle at all. It looks like green. it just looks like ignore the outside stuff, focus on the swinging and the monkeys and the action and the shooty stuff. So I'm thinking about when you say about the shots, especially in Raiders and Last Crusade and things, there are some of those points where you really do feel that. And again, with Temple of Doom, yeah, it is. There are a lot of scenes that feel inside, but yeah, they don't really feel like a set. I kind of compared in my mind the Temple of where they do the Kali Ma stuff. For me, that almost felt like the Goonies style when they're in those caves. I was like, that feels like a really big, long cave. Whereas with the part at the end of Kingdom, I was like, yeah, it feels like staring at a screen, which I do get is technology. And it's one of the arguments that I've both gone on and defended the prequels about, obviously, which obviously hugely impacted these films. Yeah. So it's one of those interesting things. So I completely get both sides, but thinking about this film, because of that age gap, it is in that weird time, because sort of, you know, back in the 80s and things like that, they didn't generally use CGI too much, you find, because it wasn't strong enough. And now we're post 2000s, it really does come in more. So do we want to move on to the father and son element? Is that what we're both ready to go on?
I believe so. I'm happy to do that. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I think I started with Tony last time, didn't I? So it's time so Scott, go ahead with father and sons. What are your sort of opinions on Mutt? And I'm interested if you guys have any comparisons with Short Round or thoughts.
Oh, I do. Yeah. This film does my boy Short Round dirty, and it's you know, one thing is obviously that you say about Spielberg doing the whole father and sons, and it's a repeat trope that he's done, you know. And you can go back to Temple. I mean, the relationship between Indy and Short Round, you know, even his like surrogate father and stuff. And what's interesting is obviously Temple in timeline is a prequel to Raiders, so it happens a year before Raiders. So there's that question of like, what the hell happened to Short Round? I'm going to do a Mike, and I
already did this.
I've berated you a number of times for this, Mike, and so
I was going to come out with it, but it's funny that you've done it. Please show it.
Yeah. So in canon, there is a comic. I hate saying it, where it tells you what happened to Short Round, and the fact that like Indy put him through school, and then he went off and actually became an adventurer of his own, and there's this sort of thing. So that's sort of like, and it's not the movie canon, I agree, but it's sort of accepted as sort of like that's what happened to him. But you accept that, like, you know, Indy is not the greatest individual. Like, he's a bit of a wanderer. Like, he doesn't sit still for long. So he got rid of that. But then you have the father and son relationship between him and his dad in Last Crusade. And it's touching. Like, you know, him and Sean Connery sort of like, you know, when you find out he was an absentee father because of the death of his mother and his obsession with the Grail, and he sort of says, you know, I was a great father. I taught you self-reliance. And you get all that scene and stuff. It's fantastic. But it comes to that resolution at the end. It's sort of like, you know, he calls him Indy, you know, and he acknowledges, you know, he wouldn't even take his father's name. He'd rather be named for the dog. After Indiana Jones, Indy comes from the dog. So you get to this film, and I understand why Connery can't be in it and stuff, and fine, like, you know, they're supposed to have aged out, and the fact that, like, I think Connery's only like 7 or 8 years actually older than Harrison Ford, so they'd be like, it just wouldn't work. He
opted out. They threw all the money at him.
Did they?
I'm retired. When I said I was retired, no, I've got all the money. Yeah,
I'm busy slapping older women. So he didn't come up, but you have this thing. So I like these ideas that they do in it, right? So, but it becomes a little bit on the nose for me. So you've gone, absentee father and son resolution at the end of The Last Crusade. And then you get to the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and it's like absentee father and son. He calls himself Mutt, so he's not, you know, he doesn't take his given name. He's naming himself after not a dog name, but the dog, as in Mutt.
I only just got that. Nice.
Yeah. And again, you go through this whole thing of like father and son, and you know, I kind of like the relationship, but then went to find out that the reason he's an absentee father is that Marion Ravenwood decided not to tell him he had a son. And I'm like, again, okay, that's sort of like just a bit of a dick move. It's fine, you know, when we'll get to that sort of thing. But it seems so treading that same territory. And I understand, like, you know, we're going to swap it around because it's sort of like, you know, generations, and he's now going to be a greaser and all this other stuff. But I'm like, like I said, you said like Spielberg, or, you know, you can't accuse him of ever doing the same thing. Yeah, you can, because like we've sort of done this twice before. And the thing is, like, I think this would have been more interesting if they had like Mutt actually be Short Round, and him coming back and being like, you picked me up off the street, you sort of, you took me on these adventures, and then you cast me off to this school, and then what? Like, that's it. And the fact that like maybe he then went and sought out Marion or something. But it just feels almost cheap. Do you know what I mean? To have like, there's this character we've never told you about before, and now we're going to have this whole thing. And I'm like, oh, but you've got a character that could do this in your canon. I don't understand why we're doing this. And so it does feel like treading over old ground, but doing it in almost like a lazy way because they want to do the legacy sequel. So, yeah.
Okay.
I'll put that up. Tony?
Yep, go on then.
Yeah, no, sure. I hear that. I hear everything you're saying. So a couple of points. So yes, it is. I mean, the Spielberg's thing that he definitely comes back to, even in his last movie, The Fabelmans, it's just about fathers and sons and parents and, and mothers and families, his jam. So that is always going to be in every Spielbergian thing. Even in Jaws, there's fraught relationships. That's always his jam. The only thing is like Duel, because you don't know anything about anybody, right? It's just, you're just being in a car. That's a banger of a movie, by the way. Anyway, so, I hear that, but my argument is if you go in chronological order, not in release order, Indiana Jones, like the first one is obviously Raiders, but then when you go back and do the prequel to Temple of Doom, that one might as well be called Indiana Jones and the Child Endangerment. That's all that is. It's like him endangering a child. That's what it is. And then so when you think about it in chronological order, then the next one, when we meet him, he's now without Shorty, and there's this lack of thing in this. He's trying to reconnect to Marion. There's this idea, well, maybe there could be something. And I don't, and then when we get to the next one, we know Marion, no Mutt, and it's just a few years later. So we know he's left Willie Scott behind. He's left Short Round behind. He's now left Marion Ravenwood behind. And I appreciate the third one, the romantic thing, he's much more James Bond in that one, right? It's just like, I was the next man, Dad. And so there's that whole scene. But Indiana Jones is not a great guy. Just like James Bond is not a great guy. They're like cool as fuck. And you're like, yeah, but they're not good people. Like, we love them, but like, maybe Indiana Jones is a serial killer. And I understand, and I said this to Jack, I was like, I'm rewatching these, and he's like, oh, but it's the thuggies and it's Nazis, so it's fine. I'm like, well, there's a lot of collateral damage here. So Indiana Jones is he is a hugely flawed, awful person. And who knows that better than maybe the person that he had his first relationship with when she was still a teenager and he was an adult in graduate school. So the fact that he stands Marion up right before their wedding and she's already knocked up and she's already been dumped by him before, that is a once bitten, twice shy thing. So in my mind, Marion's being the best mom she can by finding Mutt a dad. She still names him Henry, but by finding him a dad who is stable. She needs stable. She was a teenager. She got fucked over by this guy. Then they have this grand adventure. They travel the world. Everything is great. He always treats her as an equal, and you see that in full respect in this when he's like, they weren't you, honey. And when Mutt's like, don't let my mom do whatever, he's like, oh, grow up, kid. She can handle herself. So there's all that, like, you can see his growth as a person in this film. Like, it's Indiana Jones and the self-realization is the name of this one. Whereas Marion, I get that you're saying Marion's a dick, but I just say,
not that she's a dick. Like, it's a bit of a dick move.
It's a huge dick move. There's no doubt about that. But she's protecting her son. Now all of a sudden she's like, wait a minute. She might not have even known she was pregnant. And then he leaves her at the altar where she's going to like call him up and be like, oh, by the way, let's try to make this work. She's like, okay, dude, you screwed me over when I was a kid. And you were a kid. I was a child and you knew better and all that whole line from the
first movie. And it's the 30s or 40s as well. Let's not forget.
Correct.
So communication is actually really difficult.
Correct.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
So she's like in her, when the first time she gets burned, she's like probably 16 and he's like 22, 23. And now it's, he's in his 30s and she's in her late 20s. And she's like, listen, man, I can't keep doing this. And so that's my feeling. I hear that. Now, the doing Short Round dirty, I get it. But at the same time, he's left that part of his life behind. We can't write in what we wish. Of course, I wish Short Round wasn't all of them. He's amazing. I mean, he is the best thing about that movie. Like, Kate Capshaw is the reason that movie is my least favorite movie. Not just her performance as Willie Scott, but Willie Scott as a character is awful. And as I sent you the 2.5-minute supercut of her just shrieking, when Emma watched it the first time, my kid Emma looked at me and they said, I can't stand her. Like halfway through the movie, Emma says, I can't, is this going to keep up?
Megan said the same.
This screaming's outrageous. So anyway, I hear that point, but I just think we're going on, if Indy is Spielberg's dad's, is the avatar for Spielberg's dad, or for Spielberg himself, as Spielberg sees himself as a flawed father, this is his moment now at this moment of life for him to get back around. Because I think the funniest line in this, he's like, don't let anybody tell you anything different. If you want to fix motorcycles, and then when he finds out it's his own kid, he's like, you're going to go back to school. And there's that moment of so I get it, but I don't think, I think Short Round's missing from 3 and 4. I would have loved to have seen, because Key is so good. He's so good in Goonies. He was so good in this. It's a crime against humanity what happened to him, but the fact that, he made a good career as a stunt coordinator, and of course now he's an Oscar winner. So hopefully we can all, fingers crossed, next week or today when this comes out and we all go see it, there'll be a lovely cameo from him. Or that's the Legacy sequel, because he's still in great shape. He could go do that. So that's my counterpoint to that. I hear your point. I get it. But I do think if we're basing it in reality, air quotes, where there's aliens and gods and monsters and voodoo, then at least the human part of it is real.
Now, I want to add in here, there's a good point, Tony, I like that rebuttal, but I want to delve more deeply into Mutt as a character, less so as Mutt compared to Short Round. Because a weird thing with Indiana Jones is although this one does kind of break that, they feel like they're meant to be serialized. The first 3 you can watch in any order because none of them necessarily, they don't connect to each other, do they?
No.
It's a new person, all new cast almost, apart from Indie.
They're like Bond films. They are Bond films. Like, there's the Indie Girl and there's the Indie Adventure, and that's it.
But the fourth one doesn't. It's the first one to
is
kind of
Felix Leiter.
Yeah,
exactly.
The fourth one's the first one to connect back, which is, I wonder, that'll be a thing to think about in this, because I haven't really considered that element before. But Scott, tell us about Mutt in itself and anything else you want to add to Tony's point.
Okay, so so firstly, I would say in Last Crusade there is one in-joke when they are in the catacombs and he sees the Ark of the Covenant and he says, oh, it's the Ark of the Covenant. She says, how do you know? And he says, I know. Like, I have a good idea. So there's a few of those. But with Mutt, the thing with Mutt in this is, like I say, for me, I think I'm going to expand on the point because of the characters that are added into this film. So Mutt is that sort of he's the action piece. And there was this notion of continuing the legacy. Like, how do you continue Indiana Jones without Harrison Ford? Like, even in 2008, he was like, I think I'm done. I'm getting too old for this shit. Like, I've got to hang up the hat. And then he went on and did Star Wars and another indie film and a lot of other stuff. Yeah. So there was this notion of like, oh, Shia LaBeouf is going to be the one to carry this on, potentially, like the son of Indiana Jones. And so as a character, like bringing him in and having him as this sort of like, bitter kind of sort of like restless greaser, I actually think kind of works. I think the character actually works in that sense. Like, I think Shia LaBeouf does it well. Like the whole scene where he stands up, like, he says about Mary Williams. He says, there's been a lot of Marys, kid. And he's like, that's my mother you're talking about. And he's like, you don't have to get angry to prove how tough you are, like every time. And it escalates and stuff throughout the film and, their relationship and that. So I think the character works as a character. The problem comes when he does become this cipher for the adventure. When they're like, Indy can do some bits, but now we need this greaser that can as apparently some sort of like Olympic level fencer, can swing through trees and does all this other stuff, and you're like, oh, okay. Like, I see why they've brought this character in. He's the young one, and it just feels a little hollow in that respect. Like that whole fencing sequence. And I've got a real problem with it. There's a scene in this where they've like been using guns and all this other stuff, and they've run out of ammunition. And Dr. Spalko, brilliantly played by Cate Blanchett, pulls out a sword, and then there's like a focus in on it, and I'm going like, what the fuck are you going to do with a sword between cars? Like, this makes no sense. And then, oh no, you're going to have a sword fight. But luckily, Mutt is an Olympic level fencer, and I'm just like, this is this is the Pirates of the Caribbean, swashbuckling, sword fighting on a big rolling wheel, blah, blah, blah. Like this, do you know what I mean? And that's where I'm rolling my eyes thinking like, okay, we've left behind the practical, and I understand there is silliness in the other films, but they had that practical thing where you'd accept them. They were in enough this side, the right side of the uncanny valley to accept them. But Mutt just becomes more irritating throughout the film as he becomes more of this adventure thing. Do you know what I mean? I actually prefer him as an irritant, as a gruff character at the beginning to how he becomes towards the end. He becomes more of a thing. Like the whole bit where he throws the snake in for Indy to capture and all that. I mean, I hate that quicksand scene as well. But he throws the snake in and he's like, just catch it. And he's like, give me someone else. He's like, look, I'll call it, it's just a snake. And I'm just like this whole, this is this Indy's fear of snakes is, well known, but like this humor's not working. Shia LaBeouf isn't comedy enough to do, for some reason in this film, like he's not comedy enough to do and I want to get to the humor. So he works at the beginning, but the moment they transition him to actually acknowledging him as Indy's son, like he sort of drops off he becomes worse as a character. And that sort of is the problem for me. Like I find him less engaging. Like what the story's going to be, but he becomes less engaging throughout the film. But I feel that that's what this film does. It introduces characters that it sort of goes, oh, that's a good idea, and then has no idea what to do with them. And the two are the big Russian, who is sort of like the chief Russian henchman, who doesn't really talk, who's in it throughout. He's cool, and he's sort of like the big one that Indy's got to fight on and off. But I think he is massively underused because I think like he's great, like he's really intimidating, and he gets killed off by ants, and I'm just like, oh man, like we had Pat Roach killed off by like a plane propeller in the first one, and then he plays the giant thuggy he gets crushed in the rock crusher in the second one, and then you've had like all these cool like big villain deaths, and he gets killed by ants, and I'm like, oh, all right, that's a little bit of a letdown. But then you've got like Ray Winston playing Mac, who's another character introduced that again I'm sort of like, the only reason that Mac exists in this film is to switch sides so that the villains can find out where Indy is. That is the only purpose he serves in this film. And he keeps changing as well. So by the end of the film, I'm sort of like, I'm kind of bored of him. And so I find that like, as the film goes on, as the plot sort of grows, like the characters don't, other than like Indy and Marion, and a little bit like the characters go through an arc, but like they don't really go through anything. In fact, they become less engaging as the film goes on. I think Mutt really suffers for that. Mac becomes an absolute liability throughout the second half of the film. Like he keeps switching sides, and then he sort of leads the Russians to the temple, and then he's back on Indy's side, but then he sort of dies at the end, and they sort of, just before that, they make, he's like, I'm going to be all right. No, you're not. You're about to get torn to pieces by an interdimensional spaceship. Like this is, there's just these redundant characters, and I sort of feel that Mutt becomes a redundant character by the end of the film, and that's a real shame.
That's certainly an interesting point. Tony?
I would say a couple of things. So this is where the script was well done. I hear what you're saying, but early on, when they're first doing their walk and talk, they're doing their Aaron Sorkin moment where they're walking around the town and he's telling him everything. He's like, yeah, my mom, she sent me to this private school with all this thing. And he says, I learned all this stuff. I learned to wrestle. I learned to fence. I learned to do. So it's there. It's not. Yeah. I hear. So of course, that's Chekhov's sword. I mean, she also has the sword early on because that's how he describes her.
Yeah. I know a sword fight's coming. I know a sword fight's coming.
Yeah, the rapier. And of course, and because Indy, we know, isn't a sword fighter. That's not a skill set he has. And because of in the first one, and he shoots him, and then in the second one, where Wesley has dropped his gun, of course. So when they go to do the thing with the two sword guys in the second one / first one, he doesn't have a gun, which and so I get it. I hear what you're saying to all of that, but I would argue you still need something to drive it forward. And the difference is that these are all new characters, and that feels like, because Sala and Brody aren't there to do it, or Henry Sr. isn't there to move the plot along. That's what, like, Sala and Brody and Henry are the characters that are the Mac and the these other characters. And
but they were new characters in the last one. Like Henry Senior was a new character.
Henry was, for sure.
So was Sala was in the first film. But they are better characters. Like Sala is the digger and knows it, and in Egypt, and they go in, and he's like, they're hiring all the best, the strongest backs, and all this other stuff. Like he's the in to get him on the dig site. Like he's there for a purpose.
And so Mac is the in to make the bad guys follow him. He's not an in for them to follow. That is bad writing for someone to go, oh, I'm a double agent. No, are you a triple agent? No, I just wasn't a double agent. Like it's all that stuff, like backing and forthing. Like when he finds them in Peru and takes them to the camp, and then he's dropping in the silly jungle chase, like he changes sides again. He's like, I told you about Berlin. We were double agents and all this other stuff. Like I get they've got history. But it all is so contrived to reach, to make sure that all the characters are able to reach the next destination. I'm just like, there is better writing to be done that can facilitate this. Like, there's ways of doing this better. And I just feel like it's like, Mac is not a character. Mac is a plot cipher that but he's redundant. But I know you said about the others, but they sort of, and maybe this is just Ray Winston's performance, but like, I like Sala in the first film. Oh, I love Sala. No, I mean, you can't compare the two. Again, Sala's going to come back for 5, right? So that's exciting. That's exciting too. I mean, he's such a great actor, and I mean, he's excellent in the Lord of the Rings movies. I mean, he can do anything, right? He's always good. He was on Sliders, one of my all-time favorite sci-fi shows. He's amazing. He's such a great actor. But I hear what you're saying, but I mean, I feel like it's still called Indiana Jones so like everybody is about him getting to wherever he needs. Mutt is a side character in this story. Mac is a side character, and it wouldn't make sense to have that be Sala because he's not an American national.
No.
Yeah, So and I understand he's MI6, but you need that because now he's Colonel Jones. Like there's again the little nuggets of here and there, just like with Ox, like John Hurt is great. Playing the crazy person, but again, you could also still argue he's just fodder
an exposition,
for the plot. Right? But he is totally Captain Exposition. But we need that.
Yeah, and I get
somebody
that.
to be. Yeah.
But the difference for me is Sala serves a purpose in both Raiders and Last Crusade. Like he becomes on part of the journey, and he's intrinsic to things happening. Like like I say, that he's the in to the dig. He sort of helps him, get down to the Well of Souls. He's there helping him get the thing out. Like he's the one that arranges the boat for them to get away. Sala's like connections are important to the plot. Now he drives the plot forward, so he is that thing. But more importantly, like he feels part of it. Do you know what I mean? Like he's part because they go to Egypt where the dig is, and he's part of it. And then when they bring him back in, like we've brought him in to find Brody because Brody's an idiot and going to get lost. So Sala's the best one to do it. So when they have the raid at the end, and he's like, my brother-in-law needs camels, and he's like, or horses, and in all that sort of stuff. Like it all works. Like he's a likable character. You believe the relationship between Sala and Indy, or Brody and Indy, or all these other characters. The problem with Ray Winston's character is he's so abrasive throughout the whole thing. Like, I don't like him. But also, like, whenever these things happen, like you say, to sort of facilitate them, I feel the contrivance where I don't in the other films. So by the end of the film, when he's dropping those bloody tracker things for Spelko and the Russians to follow, I'm like, oh, you are literally just there to, like, straight away I was like, could Spelko not have just dropped something? We've already seen ridiculous sci-fi contraptions in this film. So could we not have had it that like she dropped one into the bag of the crystal skull when she had it in the thing, and she's just tracking the skull with a device?
May I
move all of that?
May I cut in slightly here, and I'll come to Tony in a moment. I think what's happening to a degree in this scenario is, I think Tony's generally saying that all side characters move the plot in the way that Scott is saying all the side characters do in the new one. But I think the biggest issue here is that Mac is rubbish. I think Scott's basically saying that Mac's rubbish, and that Tony's trying to say that it's all the side characters are kind of different. So I think what I'm going to do in this part, I will hear more from Tony with the side character part. But I think if we, in this, going forward on this specific topic of side characters, avoid Mac for the time being, because in my mind, I'm giving you a point there, Scott, because I think Matt's double agent back and forth stuff is just nonsense, and it is just quite annoying and doesn't really serve a purpose apart from clearly being a plot device. However, I think Tony's point with some of the older characters in the first three, they are all basically doing the plot movement, and Indy's kind of just falling through it. There's the joke of Raiders. That
the end of Raiders, right?
He literally doesn't even need to be involved in the whole film, but it's fun to be there with him. So, Tony, I want to hear more from you about the side characters. Let's focus on some of those, avoiding Mac for the time being, because, I agree with Scott's point there.
I think I would argue, I mean, yes, it's easy to say. Keep in mind, Mr. Burton, on your very first show, your question was, is it okay to punch a Nazi? Yes. The answer is yes. So, of course, the bad guys being Nazis, it's easy to have bad guys be Nazis. But like in the first movie, I will say, not because like you can say, oh, Belloc, or you can say, whatever. They're all under Hitler. Like, so 1 and 3, it's all about Nazis. And 2, it's all these like, the big bad is not super well developed, and his reasoning is kind of trash and whatever. It's whatever, mysticism, blah, blah. Kate Winslet is the best of the baddies. That is, I'm here to say. So as far as side characters go, Kate Blanchett, what did I say?
Kate Winslet.
Kate Winslet.
Very, very different
I would
film.
love to see Kate Winslet, but yes, Kate Blanchett is the best of the baddies, in my opinion. Like her performance, not necessarily maybe the character, but it's 1957, so we're in the height of the Cold War. And so I think this idea to have it be a Russian, to have it be her, to have it be a female villain, because the second one, or the third movie there's no real villain. It's all still Nazis, and they're all working for Nazis, and it's all greed and whatever. And for her, it's not greed. Like, it's not just greed. Like, the money's irrelevant. It's knowledge. And I love that idea that the person who is, and I'm going to go out I'm going to do a Farina here. She's his Irene Adler. For one moment, this woman that Kate Blanchett, she is Indy's equal in every way. Like the woman that Sherlock refuses to even call her a name, right? Once she leaves him, he's so butthurt, he only ever calls her the woman. For like the rest of all of the books and in the shows they've done it, everything, he like can't call her Irene. Because she's as smart as him, she's as talented as him, and she doesn't need him. And this woman, and as much as Marion is his yin and yang, this woman is his Irene Adler, like is his equal in every way. So I think as far as side characters go, as far as baddies go, Crystal Skull gives us the best of the baddies. And I feel like the rest of the side, I love having Marion back. It's clear Willie Scott's everybody's least favorite, and there is no romantic interest. So obviously, as far as side characters go, Salah's number 1, Henry Jones 2, Brody, whatever, but they were well written out of this. So this movie, to me, giving him a son, giving him a villain, and then at the end point is what she wanted was knowledge. And like the conversation that he's a professor and he's kind of at the end of his career and they're forcing him out, and what is that going to mean? And as somebody who is a professor who feels that, so to me, this has got, leaving Mac notwithstanding, I still think, and I think that the big Russian dude, I love having him come back, and it also makes sense to me. I'm okay with the ants killing him because, again, Indy can't beat him. And in all the cases, Indy always needs something else to kill him.
100%. I agree with that.
Yeah. He's not James Bond. He gets the shit beat out of him. So I'm here for that. And it's always some weird, it's not a deus ex machina because it's never really technology. It's always like something really basic and simple. But every time he has to beat somebody, it's something else. It's an accident. Marion shooting the guy and the thing moving, or hitting the guy and the plane spinning around, is the only reason he wins in the first place. So it's always an accident. To me, it's just more of the same. So that is my side character rant. I know I hung just on Kate, but God, she's so good. And I don't know if it would have worked with somebody else.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to say, because I'd agree with you about Kate Blanchett. I don't consider her a side character. That's the thing. I consider her to be the primary villain. And I think her performance in this is fantastic. Like, she is the other thing I watch in this. Like you can't not watch her. And I think she is a more nuanced character than I think any of the others. Well, when I say side, I think Marion is actually kind of like... So
you're like saying Marion, Shorty, Mutt, like
all those Mac, Marion, Mutt. There's a couple of others that sort of like, even like say Oxley. They're all sort of a piece, but they're a blur. Like even Marion, the problem I have with Marion in this, and it's sort of, is her introduction. Like, I want to talk about it. I'm going to cover Spalko first because there is something I wanted to mention about her. Because I love that thing you were saying. His Irene Adler. There's that scene at the end when the skulls are all there and they have them sort of either side of Oxley and they're both sort of like figuring it out together. Like I love that. Like you said, in that moment they are like of a piece. They are, just want to know. She shows both confidence, fear, uncertainty throughout this film. Like you see that like there are times when she sort of panics and she'll like pull out a gun or she'll do something or she'll be like frustrated. Like she's not like a comedian. No, she's overplaying it with the accent and stuff at the beginning, but you see her confidence get knocked throughout this film and stuff, and like she's scared. So no, I think Cate Blanchett is awesome. Like Cate Blanchett is absolutely fantastic in this film. So, and I agree, she's probably the best villain of the franchise to date. We've got Mads Mikkelsen coming up, and he's a belter as well. So let's see what happens. But the others, to me, are just there. I mean, Marion in Raiders, as you said, is sort of like his yin to yang. Like she's an adventurer, she's strong, she's independent, she's often running a bar in Tibet, and she's got all this sort of shit, and she can look after herself, right? The moment she sort of walks out, and I get that she's older in this, and I'm not being ageist, but the moment she sort of walks out and she sort of puts her hands on her hips and she's like, Indiana Jones. And I'm like, you're in the middle of a camp of people that are wanting to kill you. And you're now going to play some sort of sitcom family moments throughout with the whole sandpit and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, I'm rolling my eyes. And then he gets when they escape the jungle thing, and she's like, jump in. And she's sort of like, trust me. And she goes off a cliff, and she just so happens that the tree bends and gets them down to the water. And she's sort of like looking smug. And I'm going like, this isn't the Fast and the Furious. Like, I'm not accepting this kind of physics bending nonsense in an
the entire racetrack.
I agree. No, I hate it. I hate it in Temple as well. Like the whole minecart thing is ridiculous in Temple, and I hate that as well. But then it goes down the sort of and just throughout it though, she doesn't like the whole bit when he sort of says like she exposes like she met that guy Williams, the person she married. He was a good guy, all very good. And you say about him, and she said to her about like the human wreckage he leaves behind. So she's bitter. No, she's angry at him, and she's sort of left with the thing. And then she acknowledges this. The moment she acknowledges that Mutt's his son, all of a sudden she goes all like goo-goo eyes for him. And she's sort of like, and then he says like, they weren't you, honey. And she's like, oh. And I'm like, fuck off. Like, this is ridiculous. All of a sudden she's become the next indie girl, and it's like back to being this kind of thing. I'm like, there's just this downgrading of characters at the end for like just to facilitate the ending of the film. I feel the ending should have just been Indy versus Spalko trying to get to that last thing. Like everyone else is literally becomes superfluous.
Well, he tries to make it be that, and I feel like,
and I think Spielberg should have stuck with Indy.
Well, I hear that, but what I would say is, the point of it is, and this is why this one is called not Indiana Jones and Child Endangerment, but Indiana Jones and the Spiritual or Emotional Growth, is that he realizes he's not alone. Even at the end of the third movie, when they all ride off into the sunset together, it's like him and three dudes. And yeah, one of them's his dad, but like, these aren't going to be his partners. This isn't, I mean, yes, they're his family, they're his found family, and they all love each other. And I love it. I love how they love each other. Like, I love how much Salo loves Indy. And I love how much Indy loves that. Like, I'm so excited for him to be back in the third one. So I'm here. And Brody and Henry Sr. have that long history. That is like real, true, like vulnerable male love you stuff. So I'm here for it. But it's not, they're all older than him. It's not a life for him. So this is the moment where them all being there, being his backup dancers, like, we got you. And it's
no. Okay. So are you telling me this is, I got family? Is that what this is?
I am. I've never seen those movies, so
can I say I hate it in them.
I've never seen those. No, so I get what you're saying.
Yeah. And I hate it in this, where it's like we're going to continue, and I hate it in films when they do that. Like, but we're family and we're going to stick together. And I'm like, well, if you're a good parent, then you're going to go, no, this is incredibly dangerous. I want you to be safe. This makes no sense. I've still got to go stop the Russians. I don't want to be worrying. I don't want to be worrying.
Endangering Short Round.
I don't want to be worrying about. Yeah, for 1 year technically, but they've learned his lesson. I don't know. They become redundant to the actions that take place. Like they literally just follow him through a temple, and it's like they don't serve a point.
They save him. I mean, they're there to help.
Not really. They don't do anything. Like, Indy figures out the thing with the skull, puts it in the thing. Like, Oxley's probably the only other one that should be there. They figure out he figures out the thing with the skull and puts it in there. Like, that's it. He even says, like, he's the one that shouts to Oxley. Like, when they all fall over, right, they all run through, and the Indian, the temple guards, those sort of, like, Inca kind of, and they look cool as well. Like, I love some of the designs in this are great. When they're all sort of, like, whipping them, they're all falling down. They all shout for Indy, Jonesy! Indy! And then Indy's the one who has to go, Oxley, how did you get out of this before? And he picks the skull up, right? So they're not going, Marion's not going, who's seen the skull, believes in the skull, seen what it can do, isn't going, Oxley, clear the way. Like, they have to rely on Indy. And I get that, it's an Indiana Jones film, but again, they become luggage for the climax of this movie. And it becomes quickly evident that they, I'm saying they're ciphers, but they are just there to be luggage.
I feel like I hear that,
and it really damages that film.
You can totally argue that, but I argue that they're not luggage; they're stakes. It adds different stakes for him because these are the people that he loves. Like that's his future wife, the woman he has let go twice in his life, and now she's back, and now he's got this son, and and somewhere in there we know he's got another son out there.
So why isn't he the one? Right, if that's the stakes, and he's thinking that, why is he not the one then pushing them out the room when shit starts going down and the aliens all become one? Like it's actually Mac who drags him out. Like they have to drag him out the thing when he's like, oh yeah, better go. Like Right, because he needs them to sit, because he's so focused on the thing, just like her. She's him. Like, again, to use the very, because he's very Batman. Yeah.
It's one bad day. The difference between him and Spelko is one bad day.
Can we just say, all right, I like that phrase. But let's say that we've also done this before then, because this is the same as, so we've seen that, all right, and Indy doesn't learn a lesson, because we've also seen this when the Grail falls down into the chasm at the end of 3, at the end of Last Crusade, and it takes his dad. He's going like, I can reach it, Dad. He's like, Indy, give me your other hand. And he turns around and climbs out and leaves it. So I see what you're saying, but we've already done that. Like Indy should have learned that lesson, and we should show that he's had growth.
Brody's dead and his dad's dead, and he's stepping backwards. And Jim Broadbent is there, and who doesn't want Jim Broadbent? I wish Jim Broadbent was my boss. It's like it's not the same. He's not Brody. So I hear it, and I'm not saying that's not a valid criticism, but I feel like it is. I don't feel like it's luggage. I feel like it's character development, and that's what I'm super geeked about. To me, this is the link. And again, I've not gone total Tanya and not seen any trailers, but I've only watched one trailer once, and from what I understand, what's her face from Fleabag is playing
goddaughter.
So it's Brody's must be related to Marcus. So that's
I believe so.
Super cool. I'm excited. So it's another part of his family because we know Marcus was super important. Yeah. Like Marcus was a figure.
That was his father figure, like his mentor whilst his dad was
absent. It's all family. Even though Mangold is directing.
Let me put in the thing to cover off why this is luggage, and we want Indy to feel good about.
This will be your last point on you, and then Tony gets one rebuttal, and then we'll move to something outside characters.
I know we've said not to talk about Mac, right? And you talked about family, right? So you've got Marion and Oxley, right? Because they obviously have the past, so that's the family, right? And although you've had the irritation of Mac betrayals back and forth, they kill him off, and they actually have him say, "I'm going to be all right," after you found out that he's basically duplicitous. He's a gambler. Like he's not good. He's trying to steal all this gold, and he actually tells Indy it's all right, so Indy can go away conscience free and enjoy his life with his family. That is such saccharine bullshit for you to be able to have that like that. That is someone just going, "Oh no, I'm luggage, and I know I have to leave because I can't be in the last scene of this film. So, but I'm going to make it all right for everybody by saying that I'm okay with dying." Although throughout the film, I've shown that my survival instincts has been constantly about betraying people to find the best outcome so I can survive. It's a nonsense that.
Well, but then that would also argue we all agree that the third movie is the best, but that is the same thing. What Ilsa does the exact same thing. It's the same ending. He has the same ending as her. when she wants the thing, and because her greed, and she keeps reaching for it, and she doesn't end by saying it's okay. She ends in terror. So to me,
she ends. Her glove falls off. She slips out because her glove
right, but
falls
she's
off.
also terrified because she thinks she's going to get the thing, and so this is him saying like, I've again, Indiana Jones in the emotional growth. This is Mac saying it's okay. I'm okay. Agreed. Of course, the joy of this show is the agreed.
I think we've hit the bedrock here. It's just two different opinions with both good points made with these side characters, but I think we've exhausted that. So we need to wrap this up within half an hour. So obviously we'll start to wrap up in about 15 or so minutes to make final statements. But there's the one big thing about this film which connects to George Lucas more than anything, and it is one of the main criticisms by the mainstream of this movie. And I think it links in with something that Scott said early on in this. And obviously, it's the aliens. In the past three things, you've had two severely religious connected things. And then Temple of Doom is a bit not.
Well, it's still religious. It's based around.
It's religion.
It's not Christianity. It's not Judeo.
It's a different kind of religion, and we won't get into the minutia of in Temple of Doom whether or not it was culturally appropriate, because they come up with a nice little warning on Disney Plus now saying sorry about that. So we won't delve into that.
Indiana Jones and the casual racism.
So do the aliens fit in with Kalimar, the Holy Grail, and the Ark of the Covenant? So I think we'll start off with the defense from Tony, because I think most people know in the mainstream of the standard methods of attack, in air quotes, and then I'm sure you guys will bounce across it back and forth. So Tony, please tell us, what do you think of the aliens, and how does that affect Indy, and go for it.
Yeah, first, yes, they've designed them to look like the aliens that everybody says they've been abducted by. Like, these are the South Park aliens. These are the aliens that everybody...
X-Files.
X-Files aliens. These are the ones. So I'm fine with that, like, because you're playing into the zeitgeist. The movie begins in Area 51 in New Mexico, which is where, all this shit goes down. And so I'm here for it. They tell you from the beginning it's about aliens because of where it is. Like, when the doors open, it says 51. So we know from the jump, it's about aliens. Like, it's right there. And then you find out that the Ark is there. So it's like all kinds of weird shit is out here. That's all good. I'm here for it. All right. So, but then Oxley says they're not spacemen. When Mutt says, are they spacemen? He says they're interdimensional beings. So this is the multiverse at work. That's what this is. They're not aliens. They're from a different version of Earth. They're from a parallel dimension.
They're from the space between the spaces
between spaces.
Yeah, I love that line.
If you whatever you want to say, I mean, yes, they look like aliens, so that's what we're shorthanding it. I'm fine with that, because this isn't an argument that George Lucas invented. This isn't an argument that Spielberg or who did Kazan wrote this one? Who wrote not Kasdan? Not Eli Kazan. Sorry, everybody, but did Kasdan write this one? I can't remember.
I think so.
Okay.
So fact check.
So whomever actually wrote the screenplay, my problem isn't with it, because historically speaking, this is a conversation that has always been happening. It's what was in The Fifth Element, right? Our good friend Luke, who's amazing, and everybody, Fifth Element, that's also about aliens, and there's an argument to be made. People make it. There's an entire series on the History Channel. Ancient Aliens. Yeah. People argue that aliens had a hand in making Stonehenge and making the pyramids and whatever. Whether you believe in that or not remains to be seen. Mike, you're going to tell us who really wrote it. I'm wrong.
Yeah. So, directed by Steven Spielberg, you knew that. Screenplay by David Coep. Story by George Lucas and Jeff Nathanson, but then based on characters by George Lucas and Philip Kaufman.
Okay,
so all of them had a hand in things.
So Kasdan is Star Wars only. I don't know why I thought he was over on this side of Lucasfilm too. But anyway, so the argument is that this isn't something that Lucas made up. This is something from the zeitgeist. People have said for years, this is the thing, aliens. People try to look at like some cave paintings, especially South American cave paintings, and some of them people will argue like, oh, is that a representative of? These are things that exist in the world. And so to lean into that isn't that unheard of. So and it is still like you have to believe that, like whatever it is. And this is a thing I'm going to say out loud, and it's totally true. And I know, Scott, you did the ghost thing. You asked everybody if they believed in ghosts, and I do first. But number one, the thing I totally believe were real, which is also cave paintings, dragons. And here's why. Because all around the world, thousands and thousands of years ago, people painted dragons on their walls. And obviously it just meant they were remnants of they were probably just dinosaurs, right? They were just pterodactyls that still happened to live, because of course the last dinosaurs would be the ones that could fly away from the end of the world. But all around the world, there's these drawings. So the argument is the same, the dragons and aliens, is that all around the world on cave paintings, people who couldn't communicate, there was no internet, there was no phones, they couldn't send letters, they didn't speak the same language. There's these images of creatures coming from space. So it's rooted in history, but you have to have faith to believe it. And all the other three movies are about, we see that in the second movie, the voodoo doll works. Indy doesn't believe in voodoo, but it still works on him, right? And so there's always just enough of like, you can still be a skeptic, because if someone else's faith is real, it's like J.M. Barrie, I do believe in fairies, I do. So I'm here for it, because it was like, you can shit on it because it's not what you wanted, but it doesn't mean it's unrealistic to say Aliens makes perfect sense to me because it's set in Peru.
But just before Scott jumps in, Lawrence Kasdan wrote Raiders. He did write Raiders. He was the screenwriter for Raiders, and then just for completion's sake, Gloria Katz and Willard Huyck wrote Temple of Doom, and then Jeffrey Boehm wrote Last Crusade. So you were right. Lawrence Kasdan was Raiders. He did write Raiders.
Okay. For some reason, I thought he was there, but then I was like, maybe he's just on the Star Wars side. Either way, he and George go way back for sure.
Scott, thoughts on Aliens? If you like it or don't, just thoughts.
Well, no, I'm going to give thoughts. And first off, outright, actually, I've got no problem with the Aliens. It makes sense. I think, you've done 3 during the sort of world, the pre-Second World War, the rise of Hitler, the Nazis. There's this whole idea of Hitler and the occult, which is obviously sort of, a big part of it. That's the driving force of both Raiders and Last Crusade. The story of the Kalimar and all that kind of thing. It's the Thuggee, like it's sort of based in history, but they give it this sort of slightly perverse version of it for indie and whatever. I'm all fine with that. In fact, I love those. The problem I have is, and firstly, I would say things, right? So you say about the ancient aliens, like I actually just wrote an article about this for a magazine that I wrote for. So I would also say it goes back even further. So I'm going to hold up a couple of things just for the video. So if you can see that's Quatermass and the Pit, written by Nigel Neal, came out in 1958. That's about aliens coming to Earth 5 million years ago and changing our DNA. So I'm a big fan of that. I have actually got you a reference in it. I have actually got a copy of Chariot of the Gods, written by Eric von Daniken, which is the exact thing you were saying, and he's referenced sort of in this book. That was from 1962, I think, 1963, 1960, from that. And that's where he references Indy, references the NASCAR lines, he references several other things that are all, they came from this book. And the idea is that these ancient aliens came to Earth, or aliens, they weren't ancient at the time, obviously they were aliens. Aliens came to Earth in ancient times and gave us the technology and the knowledge to build the pyramids in both Egypt and the Inca pyramids, and gave us technology to do a lot of other things as well. And we took on some of their culture, which is why we have these sort of like quite advanced yet barbaric sort of cultures in ancient history, much like the Mayan and the Inca, that sort of thing. So I'm kind of cool with all that. I'm fine with it. I think it's a good thing to go. 50s was about sci-fi. You've got those 50s sci-fi films of, alien invasion was a big thought. That the alien invasion, obviously, representation of the Cold War. That's the whole point. That there was this fear of invasion, so it works with them being the Cold War and the Russians. So actually, I thought choosing aliens was a cool move. The problem I do have, though, is going back to this idea of faith and Indy being the skeptic. So if you go back to Raiders and all the films, really, but let's start with Raiders. At the start of the film, you have the 2 guys coming from the US intelligence, and they give all this exposition about what the Ark is and this idea that, if any army that carries it before it is undefeatable and it fires out lightning, and even in Indy's like, oh, it's whatever, like it's a representation, it's biblical interpretation, da da da. And throughout the entire film, it's an object. Like they find it, it's beautiful, it's carved out of gold and all this other stuff, but it's an object, right? It's not until the very last reel of the film that you experience the supernatural element of it, the sort of like, the things, the beautiful sort of waif spirits that come out and then become demonic and attack people. You don't see that till the very end. So there's no sort of like supernatural. It's an adventure, supernatural. And Indy doesn't even see it because he closes his eyes. All right. And the same really with Temple. They see sort of from a distance when the guy takes his heart out and it burns. And they're like, did I just see that? Like, they can't, it's never 100%. And it's not until the end, when they're on the bridge, as you said, that he starts trying to pull Indy's heart out. And then and Indy says the thing with the stones, right? Again, adventure, supernatural, right? And then again, the same with Last Crusade. It's not until the very end that you find that the Cup of Christ does its thing. So it's adventure, thingy. So throughout the entire thing, the skepticism is always Indy going, it's a cup. It doesn't do anything. It's ridiculous. Like, da da da. And at the end, it saves his father. It sort of gives it, eternal life. Blah blah blah. So you have all those, but in this one, like you say, the problem I have is the storytelling techniques. They go, and this is David Coop all over, by the way, because I've seen him. Like, I'm not. He's a good storyteller, but he sometimes wants to blow his load too early. So they go to Area 51, and the first thing they show you is, oh, no, we've got a mummified body in here that's magnetic, and it's linked with Roswell. So they're sort of telling you it's aliens. But you see the damn thing. Like, they show you his hand comes out, and you go, oh, it's aliens. And then when they go to the camp, the Russians have literally got an alien body in the camp. And I'm going, well, first, I don't know why you've got that. Are you just sort of carrying it around as something to do? Like, I don't know why you've got this thing. But they've got an alien body. And the skull throughout, like, the skull's magnetic, it repels ants, it has magical powers, it brings on psychic images, like, and then at the end, so by the time you got to the end, you go, oh yeah, of course this is aliens. Of course you've got aliens. Like, there's no big surprise, because you've not, instead of going skeptic adventure, supernatural, you've just gone, it does this, and this, and this, and that, and you're going to find it here, and we're going to do something else with this, and we're going to see some aliens, and like, so the mystery, like, this is why I love the indie films, is because they're an adventure film that's sort of grounded, but they're like weird fiction. Like, it's all, my love for weird fiction.
It's all pulp. Yeah, for
it's
sure.
All pulp.
Yeah.
It's all grounded in reality to an extent enough, but then you introduce that one wrinkle that tells you, oh, but it's weird. Like, there's something off kilter. But with Crystal Skull, it's literally like, here's the skull. It does all this stuff, and I'm going to show you aliens, and it's going to do this, and then you're going to have interdimensional aliens at the end. It's like, no, you say about Spalko and Indy, like, Indy shouldn't be a skeptic throughout this film, because he keeps seeing stuff that's like, well, that's weird. It should be this idea of, like, if someone comes up to you and says, I believe in ancient aliens, right? And you go, what's your evidence? And you go, well, the pyramids. How do they make the pyramids? Or, like, they can give you this evidence, but you go, well, you can't really prove it. You're giving me circumstantial evidence. Like, I think you're clearly a little bit mad. But I understand your faith in this. I understand, like, you have faith. You are seeing these things and you've come to that conclusion. But I've not seen anything that proves that. Spalko should be that character. Like, was it that film, the men who could
stare at goats?
Stare at goats.
Yeah, the men that stare at goats. The same thing, like,
that's real though. Those were real.
Yeah, oh no, it is. Yeah. But exactly. But they say, like, oh, we could make goats fall over, and there's other people going, like, they're nuts. Like, they were just sort of like, they were punching them out or something. Like, I don't know what's going on, but, like, there is this thing of, like, psychic in the 50s and 60s. There was this idea of investigation into psychic warfare, but it sounds crazy. But this film validates it from the beginning. Like, although Spalko is great, and I love Cate Blanchett in this, you should never believe her throughout this film. Like, she should be the crazy one where Indy's going, like, she's like, I've seen some stuff, but this, like, she's off a rocker. It's obsession, and, like, it could even, like, Oxley's condition should be like, oh, he's got diphtheria. He's got these symptoms he has are because he spent time in the jungle. Like, unfortunately, he's got this disease, right? And then you should have the reveal at the end, which is, oh no, aliens are real. This isn't a crystal skull. It's a skeleton. It's a crystal skeleton. Da-da. And then it should be a massive reveal at the end. So I'm fine with the aliens. In fact, I think the aliens are a great idea. It's just the storytelling. And again, this goes back to the spirit of Indy, is get so excited about its concept that it wants to tell you about it all the time. So by the time I get to the end, I'm just like, all right.
It's a very good point made. Go on then, Tony.
I would say, and again, so my point is that I hear all that. That all makes sense. I mean, you could argue, this is the only one where the cold open is a direct relation to the whole story, where the cold open and the other three obviously set up what happens. We meet Belloc, we meet Willie, What's the third? Well, it's young Indy in the third cold open. So, but again, it sets up the him getting the thing and the
Cross of Coronado.
Yeah, the Cross Coronado. So so those are setting up the story where it's not as a direct. So I hear that, but however, this goes back to me saying this one is Indiana Jones and the emotional growth. He's older now. He has been through the shit, and so he is more. Like he's had time alone, without a wife, without a kid, without a dad, without a mentor, without a stepdad, Brody, and without, Salah lives in Egypt. So I can argue that in those 20 years from the one to the other, he's been able to be contemplative, and he's like looking at the end of his career. He just gets fired in this too. He's been through the war. He's Colonel Jones. Like he's seen shit. And I just feel like, so for me, I hear what you're saying, but my argument is, that is a shorthand. His belief is shorthand to, as we age, people say, oh, as you get older, you get more conservative. I've always said as I've gotten older, I've got more liberal. Julie and I have talked about this extensively. It's like when I was younger, I was like libertarian, and now I'm like liberal. Give everybody everything. Fuck you, conservative assholes. So it's like, I just feel like it's that idea that people do change, and especially with time and distance. So, I mean, this is the reason I'm keen on this film, and the reason I think that works. I get what you're saying, and it's a valid point that it is different than the other movies, but that's the point. That is what I'm here to defend. This is different than the other movies because they didn't film it in 1992. This doesn't take place at the beginning of World War II. I mean, World War II is obviously happening in the other one, but the American, we don't see him become Colonel Jones. And this is also like Korea's happening there too, right? So like shit's going down. So communism being the threat, the Cold War, all of that is real, and that is really happening. And I appreciate that Indy is a different person for that. And it's all just done with throwaway lines. And we don't see it. I would have loved to have had an Indiana Jones movie every 5 years, but they weren't here for it. Grumpy Harrison Ford, I'm not doing that shit, whatever. Fine. So to me, I hear you. It is supposed to be different. It's like when Mike and I did our Weezer show, and it's like people get mad that the most recent Weezer isn't like the first Weezer. Right. Because they're not 19 anymore.
No, but that's fine to be different. But the whole point is there's no mystery. You're saying this is a reflection of sort of Indy's point. But the beginning of the film, like, Indy's still skeptical at the beginning. Like, when you have the FBI come in, I'm going to throw this little side point. I really struggle when actors come in as character actors that I've known from other things. So the FBI come in, and I'm like, oh, it's the janitor from Scrubs. And then
I thought the same thing. Yeah.
And then the colonel comes in to defend him and says, "You don't know how many medals this son of a bitch has got." And I'm like, "Oh, it's Jim Robinson from Neighbours." Like, I can't disassociate him from other things.
Dan Aykroyd in the second movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, why is Dan Aykroyd doing a terrible British accent? What's happening? Yeah. What? Yeah, I hear you. Okay.
But anyway, the point is that so in that, like, they talk about Roswell, the crash, and he says, "Well, you were there." And I'm like, "Well, why the hell did they bring out? Firstly, why did they bring out an archaeologist?" But you say that there's things that he's done that would be relevant, perhaps. And even then, he's like, "Yeah, he took us to a crash site. There was some debris and some stuff. Like, we saw some bodies, but like, yeah, it wasn't anything exciting. Like, what was that? It was classified. And we were all told to shut up." Like, his skepticism is there. Like, he's not changed. He's still skeptic. And even sort of like when he's confronted with Spalko at the beginning, he's like, "Oh, she's into they say about like psyops," and he's like, "Ugh." Like, even you can tell Indy's like, "Oh, it's such crap." Like, he's still that skeptic, sort of like, that might just be Harrison Ford, I don't know.
Whatever.
But like, yeah.
But like, Blanchett. Yeah.
But it's just the storytelling. Like, there's no tension for me in the reveal at the end, because I'm like, well, I know there's aliens because you've shown me them. Like, I don't feel that there's no tension around this crystal skull being either a deity construct that he says about, like an Inca deity artifact, or a crystal skull, or an actual. No, I know it's an actual crystal skull. Could it keep doing shit? And you've shown me aliens, so there's no surprise at the end.
I think you've both said a lot of stuff on this point, which is interesting to note. I was going to say, just because of the time constraint, I think we've got time for one more point for you to kind of each somewhat make. This will be. As we've got less time, it'll be less so trying to make points against the other one necessarily, but more so kind of final points that we haven't talked about yet. Because we've spoken about side characters, we've spoken about Indy's growth and the emotional beats of things, we've spoken about the main villain, we've spoken about the aliens, we've spoken about Mutt and the father-son relationship. So what I want from each of you is a one point or a couple of points of just something a reason you think this film is held in good regard that is a counterpoint, because you're very, very close at the moment, and I want more reasoning why and slightly less of one saying to the other one.
Is he going into slow-mo?
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
I've just come back. Sorry. It just popped up saying internet connection unstable.
Yep, you're back.
Right, okay, I'll just say then, just smaller points. Not necessarily a point to counter the other one's point.
Yeah,
I'm more interested in points just on your side. So start with you, Tony.
Should we just say three?
Yeah, three
things that we
kind
want
of quick
in our
fire.
closing statements. Sure.
100%. So Tony, you go first.
Right. Fair enough. So my closing statement is first, Scott, thank you. This has been a joy. I would love to talk Indiana Jones all day. Mike,
we'll be able to do plugs at the end as well. But yeah, sorry.
Yeah, of course. But my three final points, things we didn't talk about that were in my notes. Why I feel like this is a valid fourth film and why it doesn't deserve to be shat on the way that it does. Number one, it was the nostalgia lens, right? Everybody wanted it to be something that they thought the other ones were. But if they go back and do what I did and watch all four of them in a row, this is exactly like Indy grows in the films. Like there's a personal growth, but it has the DNA. There's a silly stunt, thinks the laws of physics go out the window. There's a belief in a higher power. There's a relationship between Indy and, and a person he's striving for something. So all the beats are still there. So it's just because it's slightly different. He's older. People didn't like Shy or whatever. So to me, it falls in that because of that. I think, and I know Scott's going to bring this up too, so it'll be interesting to hear his side of it. I still think, while this isn't as funny as the third one, I do think that it does the things that it's supposed to do, the things that it's spoofing a little while doing it. It's very self-aware. This one's probably more self-aware than the other ones. By showing the arc and by showing some of those things, it's also self-aware of who Harrison Ford is. And so I like that about it. I like the self-awareness that Harrison Ford knows he's coming back. He gets it. He gets this as a legacy. He gets this is supposed to spin it off. And this was his way of saying, you will not replace me with Shia LaBeouf. If he's going to be in the new Indiana Jones movie, he will be my son. He will not be, and if they want to replace me with Phoebe, and she wants to go on and have her own adventures, great, but she will not be Indiana Jones. So I feel like he thought this would be his last rodeo, and I feel like he was giving us that final performance. And then at the end, I just want to come back to this is, if people say like it was such a perfect ending and whatever, this to me, if you're looking for all the nostalgia, this hit it all. The hat comes back, Marion comes back. We see the picture of Brody. We see the picture of the dad. If this were the last movie, I would be happy that I'm glad there's a fifth one, but to me, this is a nice, pin in the Indiana Jones universe that we didn't have to just wait for, somebody to write a novel about. We didn't have to do a novelization. We just got to have it there. So I just feel like it is a love letter to the other three films while still being its own thing.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Go on then, Scott, your 3 points.
You mentioned about not as funny as I actually although there's a difference between humor and comedy, and I've said this about a number of things. I think this is the thing where the third one's humorous, like it manages to make it manages to do humor in a really good way without undermining things, and this one I think tries to introduce comedy, and I think it falls short. And I think I again feel this is because of the tone of the films that were being made at the time that it was trying to compete with. And again, we can go to the fact of the fridge, the introduction of the gopher. Like I'm surprised the gopher didn't sort of like Caddyshack dance for a second or two. It introduces things like, but the human is, like you say, because of who Harrison Ford is, and even the character that Shia's playing. The humor sort of like always falls flat for me. There are humorous moments that are more funny than the comedy moments in this. Like one of the best scenes for me in this is the car chase what university is it? Harvard?
You never know what.
Okay,
they're in California.
Okay,
you never actually know where he works. So I have always kind of assumed it's like USC or UCLA,
right?
But we never know for sure.
So whatever the university town, that car chase is good because it's actually filmed on streets. It's outside it and it looks really good. But there's a great bit where they go through the library and they're getting back up and they sort of, the comment is, you've got to go out in the field. And that sort of, then he drives off and he tells that kid to read something. And sort of, I like that. It's a nice humorous moment. It's a bit of nod. Then they'll go, oh, humor is him sword fighting and he's going to get hit in the nuts repeatedly by plants, and it's like that's not it just doesn't work. And so I think this film tries to be funny to compete with Pirates and the things that were going on, and it falls. And I find it eye-rolling in that sense. It's like you say, the branch falling into the water for the car to land on and all that kind of stuff irritates me. So I don't think it is funny. I honestly don't think this film is funny. The other thing I think there's a point you say about nostalgia, but the other thing is we knew the other films were set in their era, right? It opens, it will say like, 19, I think the first one's like 1935, then Raiders is 36, and then Last Crusade is like 38 or 39.
39 and 1912.
39.
Yeah, 1912 for the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah. So you know that because you've got the dates, but they don't sort of like ram it down your throat, and they're not like 1930s. This one is a bit like, it's just screaming like, don't forget you're in the 1950s. Like, here's a hot rod drag racer, here's greasers, here's something else. Like, it just constantly wants to tell you it's in the 50s without just going 1955 or 1957, I think it's supposed to be. And again, so it's just sort of like, it's so heavy-handed repeatedly with this stuff that I'm sort of like, so the whole sequence at the beginning with not Area 51, I kind of like the chase that's in that, when he's like, he's too old. He's a bit too old to do some of the swinging and stuff like that. And again, like, I'm kind of not too old for this shit. I like some of that. But then but don't forget, we also had nuclear weapons. So they're going to have a nuclear bomb. And you're just like, all right, okay, well, that's surely going to kill him. No, because we also had lead-lined fridges. And you're just like, oh, for Christ's sake. Like, it's so heavy-handed. And again, like that humor and stuff, again, with the gophers and that, I'm just like, ugh, it just sort of drags me down. So that's the other thing. I sort of like the humor. I don't think the humor works. I think the ramming of the 50s feels heavy-handed, like especially for Spielberg. Like there's so little. It just feels so heavy-handed for Spielberg, but there's no nuance about the era. Just going, yeah, it's set in the era. Like I've seen like Munich, these other films that he's done, these period pieces where he's just like, yeah, it's just set in the 80s and 70s, just rock on, like and then the final piece really is this thing about the ending, for me. Marrying Marion, so they get married at the end and they've got this whole point, and then the whole thing with the hat with Shia picking it up and then Indy taking it off and putting it on and all that sort of thing. And like you say, saying this thing of, no, you're not going to be Indy. It's a really weird message to the audience that sort of like says, like, we've seen 3 where a previous character sort of said, you got hired, kid, and puts the hat on Indy, and that's how it transitions to the boat. This one is literally Indy going, not a fucking chance, son, and leaves. And I'm like, so what? You don't want the legacy? So you've said about this whole thing around family. Yes, there's a smirk to it. But it's a really weird message to say to the audience when he could have just grabbed it and then put it on like Shia's head or something like that. But like, I don't know, the ending of this film is such a mixed message to the audience that I was just like, oh, you don't even know where you want this to go. Like, it was so bizarre. So yeah, I shall end on those points really.
Very interesting points made here. Very interesting. I've been taking lots of notes. I said I didn't come in with anything. I was willing to be fluid. And this is incredibly even. As in down to the T. I've got points on either side. So I'm going to very briefly go through them. And then I'm hoping by then I'll have made my final decision.
You're still making it.
It's very, very tough. You've both made some very, very good points. So obviously, Tony, with his defense, starting off, there was rumors that affected it, as well as Shia LaBeouf and those sort of things, and as well as the nostalgia machine and the lens, and it being a certain period of time after, and people kind of seeing what they want to see and things. You've got Marion and Indy's growth as characters and things. One of your counters to one of Scott's points that I'll come to is that side characters, the weaker ones, are just there to move the plot. You said they do in other films as well. Cate Blanchett's great. And then
in general, by the way, that's not
all things.
In general.
Whatever she's in, it's good. Yeah.
And then she talks about heavy metal, and then she annoys me. But aside from that, I think she's a phenomenal actress. Humor's a bit more self-aware than other stuff. It's kind of grown with the audience, and you think there's what was the last point I've got here written down? A point being, it's as good as, or maybe the worst points of the film are kind of even to Temple of Doom in a lot of ways. So it shouldn't be that. So they're the sort of Tony side. So then with Scott's side, we've got the CGI, the scenes don't feel very real. So especially the CGI parts, it feels very closed in. It doesn't feel large. It feels like a set. It feels like you're not in a world of adventure. You're filming a movie. You've got obviously Mutt is generally a worse short round. Why don't you have them in? But although he is kind of a good character to begin with, and you like him and his performance, he becomes a weaker side character, which aligns with the next point, which is the side characters not only weaken as the film continues on, but the side characters don't seem to serve much purpose, especially towards the end, and that Mac is pretty awful, both as a character in universe, but also written being a double, triple, quadruple node take-backs agent. So
takes back. I like that part.
Yeah,
it's
basically
say that.
Yeah. Well, I crossed my fingers when I said I wasn't a double agent, so I actually am, but I'm not. Then you've got the aliens showing validity from the start. So the rest of the films is that air of mystery. Is it actually mystical? And then that shock at the end, especially of the first one. Whereas in this one, literally first scene, it's aliens and it's true, and they don't pull away from that, which Tony says is a stronger point. You say is a weaker point, which are both interesting perspectives. And then the ending is very confusing with what is the legacy of Indiana Jones? Is it just basically Harrison Ford, or is anyone can pick up the mantle? What do the kids watch? So both of those are very, very well put together arguments, I'd say. I think the strongest points from Scott's side, I would say, is the unreal feeling parts where it feels like it's on a set. That's a very, very strong point. And the aliens showing validity, that's a very strong point as well, I hadn't considered. And that the side characters weaken as the film continues, I get that, but the Mac part is especially heinous. With Tony's side, the strongest points I've sort of found is the nostalgia lens does hurt that. Kate Blanchett is the best villain ever, and then in the context of these films, and then also the film itself, the worst parts are as bad as Temple of Doom in certain ways. So very, very close here. It's a really, really hard one. And rewatching these films recently as well, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to say...
It's going to punt.
It's it. I'm going to put it. I'm going to put it. Here we go. Where are we going to go? Putting it in, drum roll and things. The verdict is...
Coming up, the judge returns with the verdict. Comics on trial.
We're going to go with the defense. We're going to go with Tony. We believe that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull can be considered in with the quality of the rest of the films. And I'll say this, okay? Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is not found innocent. It's found not guilty. But mainly because...
I agree.
Temple of Doom, especially on this rewatch, is so much worse than Raiders and Last Crusade. If this was in a trilogy and it was Last Crusade, Raiders and Kingdom... this would be an open and shut case against Kingdom. It's not up to the standard of Raiders and Last Crusade. I'd say it's a couple of notches below. But especially in this rewatch of Temple of Doom, if Short Round wasn't in Temple of Doom, I know he's a big part, it would be, in my view, actually not a very good film. There's some parts in there all right, but I think Temple of Doom is very weak. So on the basis of the weakness of Temple of Doom, I think that just about means that this film can fit in with the franchise. But if this was just a trilogy and this was the third of the film, although the ending point, Tony, I like where you're coming from, this just does not cut the mustard with Last Crusade and Raiders. But I think it goes evenly, fairly.
Not guilty, but I'm not off scot-free. I'm released for time.
Just by a hair's breadth, as I said, just because of Temple of Doom. So that's my verdict, I'd say.
I will abide by that.
Well, and of course, court of public opinion. It'll be out in the universe.
I was going to say,
what the world says. Yeah,
we're going to put this out on social media and things, and we're going to let the votes come in and whatnot, and we'll have people say what they did. I'm afraid I didn't check what the votes were on the prior comics on trial, so I should have done that. Sorry, friends. But yeah, so that's what the verdict is, I believe. You've done amazing points, lots of points I hadn't thought of, some points people have already made in the past, which have been developed a lot more. So really, really amazing. Well, but for both of you.
Two things I just want to throw in as a final. This isn't to defend or this isn't trying to win. Yeah. This is actually just some indie facts about this. One thing neither of us mentioned, but I think is actually a belter in all the films. The John Williams score.
Yes. He's always the MVP.
Yeah, is 100%. Just phenomenal. So
George Lucas's career, not Spielberg's, but George Lucas's career is inextricably linked to Williams. And as much as we love Star Wars, that first Star Wars would almost be unwatchable without John Williams' score. Okay. Until Han Solo, until Carrie Fisher and Harrison Ford show up, It's unwatchable without John Williams. And then when they show up, you're like, oh, okay, stuff's going on. But
And
honestly,
Indy's
that
score is so iconic as well.
Exactly.
As soon as you hear it, you're just excited. You've got
John Williams is the GOAT, man. I love
100%.
that guy.
He is.
And the other thing that you just mentioned, Temple. Don't forget as well, Temple was the reason, or was one of the major
PG-13, yeah.
he created, and the 12 for video and cinema, for cinema releases in the UK as well. So
yeah, and I agree.
It is unwatchable without Key. Rewatching it, you're like, this kid is such a fucking star. And I know I've watched the behind the scenes stuff where Spielberg said, like the card, like you see Harrison Ford laughing during those scenes. That's real because he just said, Key, he's going to cheat. And I think it was like he's the one who stuffed him in his, like that was all improv. Like him, he's that good of an actor.
And he's my favorite character in Goonies. I love Data in Goonies is so cool. I love that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So I agree.
Yeah, so I agree. It's just, and it's not, I don't know what it is, if it's just the K-cap shot. It's weird. Like, I think it's weird that he cast his wife. And like, so that whole time Harrison Ford's like,
making out.
Yeah, I just feel like
the
that's
sexual stuff in it. I hate Indiana Jones. My least favorite thing is all the sexual stuff. You know, I'm not a prude by any stretch, but I just feel like
the Bond.
Maybe the Marion stuff's okay, but in Temple of Doom, it's like, what is this? And then even in Last Crusade, it's a bit. They kind of make a joke about it with Sean Connery, so I like because it makes the bond of Sean Connery, Henry Senior, him and Harrison Ford have such phenomenal chemistry in that film. And for me, Last Crusade works, and that romancy stuff, air quotes romance, it works because they twist it into like a kind of a joke.
Yeah.
And it's like being a bit, being a bit laddish in a way, let's call it. Without delving too deep in. But Temple of Doom, I just found, even the actress who played her says she's just a screaming blonde. And and she's not the actress herself, but the actual character is the worst part of Temple of Doom. It's just culturally inappropriate. Terrible. It's just awful in every way. And Short Round saves the movie. Without Short Round, I think Short Round for Temple does what John Williams does for Star Wars in a lot of ways.
What's funny though is at the time, whilst Cape Capsule was absolutely ripped by the critics, one of the biggest things from the critics' point of view for Temple was, they've got a child sidekick.
He's amazing.
Outrageous.
He's great. Spectacular.
And I agree.
You call him Dr. Jones.
He was in this film. Like, I've got a problem with Shia LaBeouf, but I'd say, my opinion, this film, it's fine. It's much better on the rewatch I had. But Shia LaBeouf, I ain't got a problem with necessarily. You made the good point there, Scott. But like,
if Short Round was there,
if Short Round was in this film, this would be considered.
No one would have ever.
Temple of Doom would be the weak one, but you'd be like, but you've got to watch that one because Kingdom of the Crystal Saga with him growing up, and it would actually make the whole franchise stronger.
So I'm fingers crossed that they've kept it a secret and he shows up in the.
I would love that
because they lie about stuff. People lie all the time.
Normally, if you're asked in an interview, like whenever Liam Neeson is about Star Wars or Lars Mikkelsen with Star Wars as well, literally anytime you have an interview come out which says, "Oh yeah, I'm definitely not in this film. I didn't get the call," it's almost guaranteed in a month or two they'll be announced in the thing.
Well, he was at the premiere, wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly. So fingers crossed. But I will say as well, just with one thing of my point with the atom bomb thing, although I think it's dumb, the Temple of Doom raft scene is insane.
Just as
it makes jumping out of a plane with an inflating raft and landing on water that's about this deep.
Well, they don't land on water. But they don't land on water.
They land on a mountain.
Oh yeah, on the mountaintop. and then fall into the water.
No, they were covered in. Yeah, they've all broken all their bones.
It just kind of it floats.
To me, the fridge and the rafter.
Even when Megan saw the raft bit, she was like, "What the hell is going on? This makes no sense at all." And it's like, in that element, and I know is the waterfall bit, the constant waterfalls. That's in this film, though, isn't it?
That's in this one. Yeah,
which you could, if you'd have brought that up, that might have because that waterfall bit is as stupid as the raft bit, I'd say, if not worse. Because
that's Fast and Furious. That's Fast and Furious level.
But it's
ridiculous.
I didn't find the tree thing. I didn't find anyone more ridiculous than Temple. But the 4 or 5 waterfalls I thought was insane. But let's get on to plugs, because they're on a time limit. So, Scott, you go first. Tell people what they're up to. I'll put notes in the description and stuff, but please plug yourself in front of everyone.
Yeah, as you say, sort of go check out www.20thcenturygeek.com. There's all bits and pieces on there. But mainly the main podcast now is Stories Out of Time and Space, in which myself and good friend Julian Darius talk about sci-fi films every week, and we dissect them and go off on massive tangents. And we're also doing a trekking through the Twilight Zone, which is on there. So we're going through all the way through the Twilight Zone episodes, which has been really cool. And also, check out, I do write for the magazine High Strange. So just Google High Strange.
I'm a subscriber.
Yeah. And I'm actually writing. The reason I've been reading Challenge the Gods is because I'm writing about the origins of the human species. So yeah, go check it out.
Amazing.
And
Tony.
before I plug myself, I want to say to Scott, this week, Harrison Ford Legacy sequel came out this week.
Yes.
Blade Runner 2049 just came out. So it's all Harrison Ford all the time. Well, by the time this comes out, it'll have been 2 weeks ago.
Now that's a legacy sequel he clearly,
love that.
He loved being in that one. There's no doubt about that. So, and I think he had a fine time here. So thank you for this, guys. This is great. So my website's arfarina.com. You can get all my everything there. I've got Indie Comic Spotlight on this very network. Have just been on yesterday. And then tomorrow, Mike will be on doing Star Wars Comics. It's a 3-day. It's us all 3 days, Mike. And obviously you can go and get my book, Welcome to Mansfield. You can get it to my website too, arfarina.com. Thank you guys for both supporting me and helping me out with that and being awesome. And Mr. Burton, where will people find you in your melodious voice?
Where will they find me indeed? Well, best place to keep up to date with us is the Pop Culture Collective, pccnewsletter.com, and we contribute to that, and it's got updates of what we're up to in general. But you can follow me on social media at Genuine Chit-Chat on Instagram, Twitter, and on Facebook. You can also go to my YouTube channel. YouTube is probably the best way to find out everything I'm up to all the time, because everything is in playlists, all my episodes of Star Wars Comics in Canon, a lot of the collaborations I've done that I poached the video of and put them on here, like this one, and every episode of Genuine Chit-Chat. And I've been doing a lot more video stuff of Genuine Chit-Chat, making things look nice and fancy. And there's a Disney Discussions recent one on there that myself, Spider Dan, Rhea, and Megan do every now and then, which is fun, on Cartoon Crushes. So that's a really, really funny one. And George Mann, Star Wars author I spoke to a chap about college cartels. And then my 200th episode is probably going to be out with the week, because this is coming out next week of recording this. So 200th episode is going to be out like a couple of days after this. So get it, if you haven't already by listening to this, get in your questions, send them over, and I'll read them aloud on air. And that'll be all good fun. I didn't realize I was going to be promoting my 200th episode on this, but I did. And it's also my 300th release on the feed of Genuine Chit-Chat, because of part 1s and part 2s. So I've been doing it and it's almost my 6-year anniversary. So all culminating all together on podcasting.
And we all agree it's okay. And so does Indy. It's okay to punch a Nazi.
Yes.
Yes, go back to listen to the first ever episode where the intros are ridiculously long, even longer than this outro. But friends, thank you so much for listening to Comics in Motion, or if you're watching the video version on my YouTube channel, thank you for letting me selfishly poach that view. We appreciate each and every one of you. Check out Tony's stuff, check out Scott's stuff. They're all incredible. Links will be in the description to all our amazing things. Subscribe to the feed of Comics in Motion to get all your comics and comic adjacent content and everything else that you could ever want from a podcast. And obviously check out Stories at a Time and Space, because you get conversations on there unlike any other deep dives into sci-fi content. It doesn't even do it justice calling it a deep dive. It's like a subatomic dive into the Mariana Trench. Double dive. That's how insane this is. But friends, thank you so much for joining us. Scott and Tony, great job on this. It was an amazing Comics on Trial. Appreciate you both. And we will speak to all of you listeners at some point in the future, maybe with another Comics on Trial. So subscribe and you won't miss it. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Court adjourned.